and to what extent the U.S. should allow it. There's also the question of, other than the direct funding of the Intifada itself, the the funding of where these ideas come from and why they are so easy to sell to these young impressionable minds who are have already taken most of the journey towards where they end up with this with these protests. So we're going to talk about that today. Welcome to the reality show, day 207 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Marco, Richard, and Anders. Anders, I'm going to go to you first. Your thoughts on oh, and let me just say, at some point later on, we will, if we have time, we'll talk about developments in Colombia since yesterday, since the deadline to evacuate, and what has happened since. But on this issue, Anders.
Yeah, so on the issue of financing these student organizations, I think you have to differentiate a little bit here, depending on, especially here in the US, and it probably applies to Europe as well and the rest of the world. But so we have public universities and we have private universities. Most of those private universities are also receiving government funds in one form or another for research or for just running the institutions and their programs. And in the past, for instance, we had a couple of years ago an organization called the Confucius Institute. I don't know to what extent it's widespread outside of the US, but it was basically an effort by the Chinese government to officially promote the study of the Chinese language, or Mandarin, here in the US at universities. But there were some covert activities, and some supposedly the Chinese government had other goals than just spreading the knowledge of the Chinese language with this. Now, so the government had funds for this, and in this case, there are gray zones here, obviously, but it can be perceived as a threat to the U.S., and so they cut back on those funds. So if there are similar situations here, where we see foreign governments infiltrating or interfering with the foreign policy goals of the country, and those universities are receiving government funds, then I think it's entirely valid for the government to put pressure on, or obviously cut back those funding. Now, here in this situation, we're primarily talking about, or there are private NGOs, so non-government organizations. So I think it's pretty well established by now that the Soros foundations and even some Rockefeller foundations have provided monetary support to some of these pro-Palestinian organizations. Now, they didn't provide this support probably to encourage campus protests, but that's what they've been using the money for. So when we see people camping out on Columbia's lawn here and seemingly having a great time, that's probably money coming from some of these organizations. And in this case, obviously universities should act differently. The behavior of the administrations here is just despicable over the last few weeks. But otherwise, it's primarily public opinion, I think, to put pressure on these NGOs to stop and have that change over time.
Yeah, and there's an interesting question there. Yeah, if it is, to the extent that it's George Soros or any private citizen in the U.S. supporting a cause, and the expression of views, vile as they may be, that is that is protected in the U.S. and should be elsewhere. But if you're knowingly funding violent activities, that's a different story, and of course is not protected and shouldn't be protected anywhere. Marco.
Yeah, that's whether somebody is knowingly funding these protests. It's hard to tell, because personally I don't know who's funding them. Usually you have foundation giving money to a company, who gives a grant to a charity, who gives money to an individual who uses to do something else. So unless you're the FBI or the National Crime Agency here in Britain, you haven't got the resources and the ability to work out actually where the money came from in the first place. However, we do know that the worst dictators in the world today are actually giving money to university under the guise of, as you said earlier on, Anders, either promoting culture in the from the kingdoms or domains or dictatorships or whatever. And the reason why they do this is because they know that ideas motivate actions, that people react in a certain way when they think in a certain way, especially targeting vulnerable young people who are not educated into knowing how to think, and so they react to images instead of ideas. It's very easy to manipulate them. And of course, they know, being dictators, they know that if they can make you accept an idea, they can make you do whatever actions they want. You cannot invade America, but you can flood America with ideas that make people behave in a certain way. Again, we're talking about people who are unable to think with their own mind, people who accept half-chewed idea from whoever gives it to them, and they gather them together and never integrate across. We're talking about the people who see Ukraine attacking Russia and they get upset, and they see the girls killed in Iran for not wearing a scarf, and they get upset. However, they don't connect the dots, and they treat the single events as individual events. That's what we call not thinking by principle. And that's the action. And the issue here is that if they make you accept that your master has got the best intention for your wealth, your well-being, then you deliver yourself to slavery, and that's as easy as that. So the real issue here is not who's funding them, but who's taking the actions, which leads to this kind of vandalism, violence, and anti-Semitism we see in campuses.
Yeah, I would certainly back up the points Marcus just made there. I mean, it requires a considerable amount of investigative journalism to pull the full threads of following the money as money is dispersed from one organization to another. That's absolutely true. What you can see at all the different levels is the level of influence and funding that takes place from governments in the Middle East, in a similar way to Anders just outlined for the Chinese government, the Confucius program. And that influences the program, scholarships, all those kind of things, student exchange programs, the ideological stuff that is taught, which kind of speakers are encouraged to present at different universities, and the Islamist ideology that's often reflective of the Qatari values that is often promoted. Now, I remember some of this going quite far back. For example, even when I was at school in the 90s, there was an Arabic schools program run for the better private schools in the country, backed by the University of Cambridge, to promote Arabic learning. So I learned Arabic for a year whilst at school, including learning how to recite Muslim prayers by heart as part of my examination. So, and that's prior to 9/11. So there's a track record of this that goes back some distance, and of course there's lots of ways in which this is expanded, and I've got several examples that I'll mention during the show of different ways in which you can see the clear threads of how money is funded. But I think what's interesting is the fact that it manages to ally two utterly different ideologies together: the radical left ideology within US campuses, and the pro-Islamic, often anti-women's rights, anti-gay rights agenda, and the fact that that's overlooked and joined together is evidenced throughout this, and the ability to carry out cognitive dissonance, or as we would call it as objectivist evasion, in order for those values to tie together and be promoted under one banner, That is what's shocking to see, when you would think that there would be a level of critical thinking at these Ivy League and top-level universities.
And if I may just add something, over the last couple of decades, I think adding insult to injury here, especially for U.S. universities, many of the large U.S. universities, they actually have campuses in the Middle East now, financed by those local governments, and obviously that is adding to the, I guess, reluctance of these administrations to take action, because they have a lot of money invested in this, and they're reluctant to offend their sponsors.
That leads me to mention something, if I may, just at this point. I know that Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, Georgetown, Northwest, they all have Qatari campuses. And there was a recent case where the Texas A&M University, which is one of the biggest universities in America, they had a campus that they opened in Qatar, in Doha, back in 2003. And two organizations looked into their two organizations that concentrate on anti-Semitic stuff and exposing it, the Zachor Legal Institute being one of them. They looked into the agreements that this university, Texas A&M, had with the Qataris, and went to court for 5 years to try and work out exactly what was behind that agreement. They won the case, and they found a considerable amount of evidence that the scientific and engineering program that was located in Doha, they had signed over any of the discoveries to the Qataris should they be found should they be discovered whilst that campus was in operation. And Texas A&M has a big nuclear program to it as well. So the dangers there are quite apparent, where you can see that US security and stuff are at risk. And they subsequently closed down the campus in Doha. And it's hard not to conclude, when you look through the case, that that's not in some way to try and conceal all of those agreements that were in place. But of course, many institutions continue to have Qatari campuses, and those agreements aren't always clear, apparent, transparent to everyone concerned.
Yeah, Robert Nasser says in the chat, who is funding the campus Intifada? Yo mama. Well, if your mama's alumni and willing to support her alma mater, no matter what the professors are teaching these days. Thank you, Catherine, for the super chat. Yeah, there's a point there, which is, if the point about being funded is, you don't have to actually agree to it. You don't have to have the opinions of the people funding you, and have to that's a choice. So I want to kind of steer clear of the implication that because Qatar is funding something, they're the ones responsible. No, if you were receiving funding from Qatar and promoting their ideas, you are at fault. And yeah, with these student protests, one thing we've noticed, and this has been it was in their published guide for students, that there are going to be outside agitators. We've seen some of those, and we've seen what I would consider evidence that there's a lot of that. And here's something from last night from Colombia, a video of them chanting something. No, I don't know what that means, but I do know what language it's in. It's not English. It's not the language of the country that they're in. It is a language of many countries and a population that wants to destroy the country they're in. And it's it's kind of indicative of what might be behind it. Another one which we showed a few days ago, but I think is relevant now, is this video of the chant that protester-led students in outside of Colombia. Do we have that ready?
Mother was in your place. I wish my mother was in your place. I wish I was a martyr. So if you guys want to repeat after me, it's okay. If you're not, it's okay. Come on. Sorry, we're getting angry. Okay, guys, ready? يلا مليح. جاهزين? So again in English, it means mother of the shaheed, mother of the martyr. How lucky you are. I wish my mother was in your place. And this terrifies the IOF because they realize they can't do shit to us, not even death. The best they can do is hold our dead bodies. يم الشهيد نيالك يا ريت اني بذلك يا ريت اني مكانك يم الشهيد نيالك يا ريت اني بذلك. You'll never die.
All right. Yeah, all right. We've seen enough. I mean, again, it's hard not to watch that and also think about how these students are trying to repeat some chant that they don't understand, but that is being translated, and yet they still repeat it, knowing what it is translated to. And the admission, somebody, Peace for Israel says in the chat, death cult. They're proud to be a death cult. That's what he's saying. He's saying you can't do shit to us. The worst you can do is hold our dead bodies, which, you know, if you are on the side of life, that is the worst thing that could be done to you, is you no longer being alive. But to them, they are a death cult. That is a celebration for them if they die as part of their cause. Anders, any thoughts on that?
No, I think you captured it pretty well. I mean, the one word for it is nihilism. It's death for the sake of death. I mean, there is no positive program associated with this. Yeah, we've seen it repeated over time, over and over in history, and here we are again. It hasn't gone away yet. Eventually, someday, we're hopefully in a better place. But right now, this is what we have to fight.
Well, not only has it not gone away, it is getting worse and getting closer and closer to home, which also, you know, is a reminder of why we have dedicated our content to this, is because you know, this is not just an act of terror that happened in Israel over 6 months ago, and now Israel is trying to fight back. This is something that the way the world is reacting is unfortunately could be a game-changing moment in a very, very bad direction. Marco.
Yeah, it is staggering how these kids are so unable to connect the dots. They see the world as a disjunct series of events which have no connection with each other, and therefore they are totally unable to understand what a cause of one, or the effect of one is caused by another. And I mean, getting to the point where somebody is telling you to repeat a chant that effectively implies that you're gonna die, and not realizing, hang on a second, that's not something I normally like. They don't realize it. They just say it's in Islamic, so it must be cool. So I repeat it. It doesn't matter, the content doesn't make any sense, because I've already decided that everything Islamic right now is cool, and everything, you know, that looks anything like civilization or love of life, no, it's not interesting. I've seen that, you know. I've got freedom here. I don't need to worry about keeping it. They take it as a metaphysical thing. Actually, being free has been an achievement that's taken 2,000 years to reach, and then they take it for granted. They assume they're always going to be free. But on the other side, you're dealing with people who know exactly how to take away your freedom, just by undermining bit by bit, chipping and breaking the link between your thinking and your taking actions towards your own life, and, you know, the end result, which is Islamic dictated slavery.
I wanted to refer back to the point you made, Razi, about the fact that who funds it doesn't override your volition, your agency, your decision making. Whether you're a student, whether you're an institution, whether you're deciding where to take your money from as an institution, or whether you're repeating some of the dogma that you've been asked to in order to justify that money. Or in order to accept it. And I also wanted to mention a lot of the pragmatism that takes place, not necessarily from the radical left, but from the middle ground, which often is the place where pragmatism breeds most successfully. Now, here's a quote from one Sir Tony Blair, just ahead of the World Cup, the Football World Cup in Qatar. He said in late 2022, this is when lots of people were arguing that there should have been, it shouldn't have been there, and that the football players were talking about wearing armbands in favor of gay rights and highlighting the gay rights issue within Qatar. Tony Blair said this, I quote, "It is not sensible of us to disrespect Qatar. They invest huge amounts of money in this country, in the UK. Now that tells you how much he's prepared to ignore when necessary. And he does the standard technique. It's worth looking at how does he rationalize that? How does he get over the fact that runs contrary to what he would say on any other day about gay rights? First of all, he raises questions such as, are they going as fast as we want? No, but they are. I think they're heading in the right direction. So he poses a question, which he himself poses and then answers in order to jump the logical gap. And he claims that social revolution is happening there anyway, I think. That's one way in which he glosses over it. He just predicts that, and he points out, whilst in other settings he would point out that symbolism is the be all and end all, as you would see in all other settings. He points out that the armbands that they wanted to wear will not determine if a country moves to a more progressive position or not. So that contradiction is really evident, and that pragmatism is really evident. One on the other side, on the right of centre side, would be this example: the Margaret Thatcher Scholarship Trust, which was established in 2013, which joined up with the University of Oxford and took a generous donation from the Qatar Fund for Development in order to produce, and I kid you not, the Oxford Qatar Thatcher Graduate Scholarship for one of the colleges in Oxford, which you can apply for today, but only if you come from a group of Islamic countries in the Middle East or North Africa. Not Israel, of course, they're not in the list, but it does include in the list Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Qatar, and listed as though it's a country like any of the others, Palestine. So even at the point when you're advertising the scholarship, even at the very basic level, you've already conceded that Palestine is a country like any of the others in order to take the funds, to associate it with Margaret Thatcher's name, and introduce Qatari money into the University of Oxford. That's just one example. But look how that pragmatism leads to a degrading of a legacy and of the values that somebody would stand up for, that Margaret Thatcher would stand up for.
Yeah, I mean, everything around the World Cup in Qatar is these things came to the surface in such a blatant way that the people on the Qatari payroll apparently didn't mind it being out there. First of all, Qatar would never win a bid to host a World Cup in any reasonable bidding process, because it just doesn't fit what you need in terms of a World Cup ready country. If there was a World Cup that was starting tomorrow and it was going to take place in Britain or in France or in Germany, pretty much all the infrastructure you need is already there. Whereas in Qatar, none of it was there. They built it. We know how they built it, nobody cared because people were being paid off. And and during the World Cup, the fact that not a single player objected to playing there tells you something. It's very telling in comparison to the calls to have Israel removed from the Olympics, the objection of some countries playing against Israel. It tells you that where people stand on these things. I think maybe this is a good time to play a clip that has resurfaced in recent days. People may have seen it on social media of the Emirati foreign minister from a few years ago. Again, not the Emirates are not exactly where I would look to for hope, but in this clip, he is warning of something that is very, very much, I think, true.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
All right. Yeah, the words there are what we needed. Yeah. Let me just quickly, Anders, before I go to you, let me read Jim Brown. Thank you for the super chat. Jim says, are the names of the professional activists at Columbia known? Not the students, but the activists who organize protests and lead protests for a living. Well, they're not known to us. And in terms of their it's also difficult when people cover their face, which is why they cover their face, because they know it's difficult to for them to be identified. And if the police did their job, these people would be known, they would be arrested, and this problem would be solved quickly, as it has been in some universities where they've attempted something similar unsuccessfully. Anders.
Yes, I believe actually in answer to that question that some of the ringleaders have been identified, and then these Palestinian student organizations, and don't quote me on this, but I saw somewhere that there are kind of scholarships or grants that these students get so that they can maintain a certain standard of living without and dedicate a large portion of their time to these kind of activities. So I think that has been fairly well established. Now, as for this Qatari foreign minister, I'm not sure I understood where he was getting with his comment. Was that a comment in terms of, he said, yeah, I really can't comment because I'm not sure I follow you completely.
Well, just in terms of the students, so yeah, some of the student leaders have been identified. There was famously the one who said that all Zionists should die and was kicked out of Columbia for that, and then he apologized. But yeah, the question of the professional activists who are not students is a different one.
That not students. Okay.
Yeah. And then with the Emirati foreign minister, I think he was pointing out what is going on now, because I think he also retweeted somebody. So when this resurfaced, somebody tweeted it, and then he retweeted it and said something like "I told you so." So I think he's referring to probably to Qatar and what they are doing. This was I think this was at the time when there was real tensions in the Middle East, not involving Israel, with Qatar and some of the other countries. Marco.
Yeah, this is probably, I think, Sunni having a go at Shiite because they did something, I think, related to an event in France, I think. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we've been told a number of times by these guys what their intention is. Hamas has made it clear in 1980, and then the various issues of their charters, what they wanted to do. We know what the Palestinian Authority wants to do. They even celebrate when Hamas kills Jews. So why are we still believing that these guys are actually fun-loving friends you want to associate with? Is beyond me. I mean, read the Quran, it's black and white. That's exactly the kind of stuff they follow. It's quite clear about the fate of the people who don't believe in Islam, people who abandon Islam, and the Jews. They hate infidels, they hate the Jews, and they want to destroy them. Again and again, they give you the option. You either follow Islam or you die. It's easy as that. But we still pretend we can argue with them. You know, it's the story of the scorpion and the frog. You can still think you can reach an agreement, and they're not gonna kill you in the end because because you don't want them to. That's beyond stupid. And this guy is actually taking a piss out of the whole attitude of the West, saying, you know, you think you keep ignoring what we tell you, what everybody tells you, and you're going to pay the consequences. And we see it here in London in particular. We see it every single Saturday, what happens. We take all sorts of violence. These students, well, yes, student leaders, but the real dangerous people are the people in charge of these universities. The people who give a deadline and then let it go away unpunished. You know, that's not how you deal with issues like this. You have to, when you set a red line, unlike Obama, you have to stand by it. Otherwise, don't do it. All you do, you show how weak you are and how ready to appease. And that's why the calls for Israel to stop the Gaza operation, the move to Rafah. It's over and over again. It just pops out everywhere you look is a kind of appeasement and, you know, altruistic view of life, which in the end, all it does brings your own life to an end.
I think one of the interesting things I've seen concerning how the left and the right in the US divide when it comes to supporting countries in the Middle East and the effect that has on the funding is I've read quite a few articles which seem to indicate that the Qataris, for example, lean towards the left and encouraging them, whereas countries like Saudi, Egypt, UAE, and Bahrain tend to support the right. And are supported in turn by the right. I don't know the extent to which that's true, but it certainly seems to be some evidence for that. And in terms of, you know, seeing which countries helped defend or played some part in assisting Israel when Iran attacked, and of course those countries that have done agreements with Israel in recent years. Would suggest that may well be the case. But what is interesting is how the radical left, with their attitude towards cutting down talk they don't like, that certainly as a technique aligns with a lot of the oppressive attitudes to free speech that come from the source in the Middle East. And I think it's worth reading out, if you could just flip to that for me, Marco. Sure. It's worth reading out what the ethos, the values are of the National Students for Justice in Palestine, because this couple of sentences, which badges together all of what we're talking about in terms of radical left agenda and, of course, the Islamic element and the Palestine element, tells you an awful lot. They say, this is what they claim are their values. We believe the struggle for a free Palestine is also the struggle for Black liberation, gender and sexual freedom, and a livable and sustainable planet. All pursuits for freedom, justice, and equality are materially connected and require us to struggle against state violence, colonialism, capitalism, the big evil, and imperialism in all of their forms. Now, if you ever want a clearer indication of what's going on, that is it. That is like the equivalent of reading the Hamas Charter and understanding what Hamas is.
Yeah, if it weren't so sad, it would be funny. But to put a slightly positive spin on this, I mentioned before, you know, that here in the US, there is, we think, still a fairly large silent majority that are looking on from the sidelines or are abhorred by what's going on. And as more and more as this continues, the student protests, and as it escalates, basically, we're starting to see a pushback, I believe. I mean, latest, the fact that the faculties are out with the students and basically outright support this. There is no excuse or no apologies or anything. There are faculty members, hundreds of them, who are supporting the students. I mean, that is telling you where the students are getting their ideas from, right? And I think much of the general public, they are disgusted by this. And then now we're exposing the financial support as well. So I know we're not talking politics here, but the U.S. election this year is hanging over all of this, especially when it comes to how the politicians are reacting right now. Because if it weren't for Donald Trump being the front runner for the Republican Party right now, I think we would look forward to a Republican landslide. Now, I'm not saying that a Republican landslide necessarily is good, because there's that is in many ways a scary option too. But really, Donald Trump is the only thing that is holding that back right now. So that's why it's still not a decided outcome of the election. So here in the U.S., we're keeping a close eye, and it'll be interesting to see how the next 6 months develop.
Yeah, and on positive news, I did see a recent poll from the U.S. where 72% of people said that they think that Israel should go into Rafah and finish the job. So they're not occupying any campuses, but they're out there. Marco, you mentioned, I think in passing, the stuff that Qatar does in London. They're buying up a lot of bits of London and buildings, and have businesses. And one business that does not receive Qatar funding is the Ayn Rand Center UK. So maybe someday we'll do an episode on who funds us. But the short answer to that is our members. And by the way, there is no membership level, even at the highest one, at which if you want us to occupy universities in support of Hamas, we will do that. That's not one of the perks. There are many other perks, though. One perk that you get at any level, including the cheapest level, silver, which is £10 a month, or YouTube membership, which is $5 or pounds or euros, depending on where you are. You get access to live streams of this, is our book club, which is on a short hiatus, but is coming back soon. And here's a sneak preview of what to expect with that. Yeah, well, so we've done ads before. I think this is the first time we paused the show to do an ad for ourselves, but it's definitely worth it. That's only one of the perks you get at the silver level, but it is the book club. Just wrapped up the Fountainhead. I think it took around 2 years to get through the Fountainhead. So we delved very deeply into that, and it'll take, I'm assuming, much longer to get through Atlas Shrugged. These book clubs, Shoshana Milgram is, I think, one of the best Rand scholars out there. She is regularly there and takes part in them. It's definitely worth more than it costs, and you get more with it. So consider becoming a member. There's a link in the description. And of course, if you're a YouTube member, you get access to the live streams. Kathleen, thank you for the super chat. Kathleen says, awesome ad. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Catherine. I'm not sure if I thanked you yet. And thank you, Gail, for the super chat as well. All right. That was fun. Now back to something less fun. So should we talk about what has happened in Colombia since last night, basically? So yesterday, the students had or the protesters, the rioters, whatever you want to call them, had a deadline. I don't remember how many deadlines they've had before, but this was their deadline to evacuate, 2 p.m. They didn't. I think there were some arrests, right? But it's mostly that students were suspended from the university and won't be able to finish the semester. And then some of them went to occupy a building. We have a video of that. We can show it. So last week we read from this guide that Eitan Fischberger tweeted, the guide that was endorsed by National Students for Justice in Palestine, about occupation and taking lessons from the 1968 occupation of Colombia. And they're definitely taking a lesson here because they're copying exactly, I think it was the same building, right, that was occupied in 1968. The police, the Columbia University is still not allowing the police in even after scenes like that. Anders, your thoughts when you see stuff like that and you know that the university is telling the police to stay out and the police stays out, because at some point you don't actually have to listen to the university if you're the police. At some point you can go in if you think it's right to do so.
Yeah, it's what is there to say? Well, that is new. It's I think it's pretty predictable now. As I understand it, there are basically 3 levels of calling for support here. Number one, all the universities, they have their campus police and campus security, and they are, I don't know if they're understaffed or they're just handcuffed by the administration. I assume the latter, or both. And then, as you say, you can request support from the new, in this case, the NYPD, and that hasn't happened yet. And the third level is for the federal government to call in the National Guard, and that obviously hasn't happened here yet either. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see just if either the police department or the National Guard, eventually will step in. But I really don't want to offer any predictions of where this is going from now.
Yeah. By the way, last week we did an episode about what happened in Emory University where they did step in. And tomorrow we're going to cover that as well on the reality show. We're going to talk about what the police should do and what they're doing, or the authorities, what they're doing where they are doing their job, unlike Colombia. Marco.
Yeah, if with a little bit of protection of individual right and right to property, you could stomp this so-called protest very, very quickly. If you show people that they cannot take the law in their hands and do what they want with somebody else's property, they will learn very soon. These things wouldn't spread across the country if everybody dealt in the same way as I think the University of Texas dealt with. If somebody claims to have the right to occupy, all it does is claiming to have the right to breach somebody else's right. And we all know that the freedom of me swinging my arm ends where somebody else's no starts. So we cannot even keep calling these things protests and these protesting students. These are just thugs right now indulging in violence, vandalism, and all sorts of breaches of rights, which are then claiming to be trying to protect. You cannot argue for somebody's rights, somebody who doesn't even qualify to actually have the rights like Hamas to be applied to them. And then you cannot disrupt the life of other students, first of all, and certainly you cannot turn into an anti-Semitic thug, stopping and making a life of Jewish students just because they're Jewish, and be a total Nazi and supporter of Hamas.
These people who are supposedly against occupation are very willing to occupy somebody else's property to make their own point, it would seem. And it's no surprise, is it, that when you capitulate to thugs shouting the thuggish slogans they have been and calling for violence, and you capitulate and you set deadline after deadline and you don't follow through on your word, what happens? Escalation happens, in the sense that it becomes more violent, doesn't it? And that's exactly what we've seen here. It actually becomes physical violence. That's an inevitable consequence of not making it clear what the boundaries are at an earlier stage, and sticking by your word and making what those boundaries are based on, making clear the principles that they stand on right from the beginning. So you should have been suspending students from the start. You've been telling them that they wouldn't be able to graduate and have a degree in the university's name, and of course they shouldn't have been able to occupy the site in the campus at all, let alone for this kind of duration. So this is the next stage, and this imitation of 1968 that is just an inevitable consequence of the fact that they've looked at all the kind of Marxist, leftist protests in the past, and they've copied them. They haven't necessarily seen that those don't work. That's possibly the part of the literature they've not focused on. And of course, it won't work here either in the end. But of course, it's always a messy process from this point to making sure you re-establish law and order within these institutions. And I think the whole country will be quite shocked by that, in the way they're all, everyone's always shocked when you see vandalism, nihilism, particularly at an elite university such as that.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that all these protesters or vandalizers, they're taking a page out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals from back in the 60s. And so here we have the Jew haters learning from the Jew, Saul Alinsky. So. But one more comment I want to offer, and that was, you mentioned University of Texas. And I think University of Texas was a mixed case, because we still have to draw the distinction between free speech and when it becomes violent in terms of either violating the rights of people or property. And Greg Abbott's action down in Texas, I think, was a mix there. So that was not entirely clear cut that all that was done was correct. Now, what I think it comes down to is that when it comes to differentiating between these free speech actions and violating rights, is that the universities, they just don't have clear-cut rules. So at Columbia or any university they certainly, after this is all over, they need to revisit their definition of free speech and making it, I think, a lot more narrow, because still, this is on private property, and they can set the rules, and the rules are simply not there. And so that is something that has to come out of this eventually.
Yeah, although, they can set the rules, but when somebody starts shouting pro-Hamas slogans and and harassing Jewish students, that goes beyond the freedom of speech. That's violence.
Well, shouting. There's a difference between shouting Hamas slogans and harassing Jews. You know, that's where you draw the distinction. As despicable as we think it is, if the college, if the university in its free speech rules say that, yeah, you know, at certain times on certain parts of our property, you can shout through pro-Hamas slogans, well, then that's as despicable as it is, that may be okay. But when it goes beyond that,
by inciting violence is still a crime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So part of the bigger problem there is if the U.S. and Israel did what they should do and declare war on their actual enemies, starting with Iran and including all of Iran's proxies, then that's a different thing. Then if you are chanting pro-Hamas slogans while you are at war with the country that Hamas is representing, then you are giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and that's definitely something that is then the state gets involved in. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, PC. PC says it's sad these students are so badly informed. It's not that they're badly informed, it's that they have values. I mean, they definitely are badly informed, but that's not where it starts. It's not that if you point out to them and they believe that actually it's not 35,000 like Hamas says, it's actually more like 20,000 dead, and maybe 14,000 of them are terrorists, and terrorists hiding behind people. That's not going to change anything. They are on the side of savagery, and they are on that side because of their values, not because of whatever fact or lie they heard more recently. So it is I think a matter of values. Larisetto, thank you for the super chat. Larisetto says telegraphing Kristallnacht. I was also thinking at some point of this analogy, and actually thinking that we might reference it perhaps in the title. It's there are similarities, I think with Kristallnacht. You know, they had an excuse back then. They had a reason. They always have some sort of rationalization. People have some explanation for why they do the most vile things. And then that justification was used to attack the Jews. And Richard, you were talking about violence. There has been violence against Jewish students, and there have been incidents that we've shown on this channel where they just don't let students in, which is similar to not specifically Kristallnacht, but to what was done to Jews in World War II and in the run-up to World War II.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on the students not informed. So what's the excuse for the professors? You know, the cow being arrested on the ground, shouting, "I'm a professor, I'm a professor." What's her excuse? She's not informed. What's the excuse of the other fat woman on the pedestal shouting at the Israeli guy, telling her the facts? It's not about fact. It's about the way they think and the way they avoid thinking, and totally shut out anything which doesn't fit their own beliefs.
And another example of that is the fact that they've renamed Hamilton Hall after what they're claiming is a 6-year-old martyr, a Palestinian child killed, and yet the full investigation of that has proved that the IDF were nowhere near it, and it was absolutely nothing. It was clearly the evidence for that case is utterly wrong. But of course, they don't care about that as long as they've got a mascot, as long as they can claim a child. But of course, and represented as representing their cause. But of course, they show no such concern for the child hostages, for the children killed on October the 7th. And when it comes to claiming ignorance, these people held certain views before October the 7th, and all the evidence of that day was not enough for them to reassess their position. They chose instead to evade, to double down, and that's what makes it truly evil.
Was that Muhammad al-Dura that they named it after?
No, they named it after a child called Hind Rajab. I think that's what they were chanting in the first clip.
The cloth that they put out has got his name.
Yeah, Hind Hall. Yeah, I think it might be a girl's name, but yeah, either way, it's utterly false.
Yeah, and Marco, I'll reiterate, it doesn't matter how they look, they're evil nonetheless, regardless of the women who are protesting and being arrested. Yeah, that professor. Luckily, we don't have enough time to show that video again, so I will watch it in my spare time, and I'm sure there will be more shows where I will ask Daniel to replay that. Different Daniel, sending a super chat. Thank you, Daniel. He says, he quotes the Wall Street Journal saying, protesters are the generation that had no fun. Well, they look like they're having fun. They're dancing, they're singing, they're this is their and if you see some of the other interviews we've shown, they have no idea in some cases why they're there. They're just there to have fun. But look, they're also just following orders, and we know how that where that has led to in the past and where it could lead to this time. All right. We will, of course, continue to cover this on this channel. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Anders, where can people find more of your work?
You can find me on Substack, andersingemarson.substack.com, one word, or at thinkrightOrWrong.com, also one word.
And Marco, Richard, other than that great ad that we saw earlier that was produced by you guys, where else can people find your work?
Please check out the sister channel to this, The Briefly Objective. We're trying to increase the subscriber numbers there so that we'll be able to monetize it and help fund this channel as well. And we're already at 700 subscribers, growing from much lower. So please join that. You'll find all sorts of short videos there, edited from this channel with accompanying visuals to really make clear the key points in this conflict.
And there is a link to that in the description. You can go over right when we're there's one in the live chat as well. You can go over, hit the subscribe button. It doesn't take much. I'm Razi Ginzberg on X. And of course, other than membership, an easy way to support our work is to like all our videos by clicking the like button, share them, comment, even a brief comment. Comments help more than anything else with the algorithm. And tune in when we're back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thank you, and we'll see you then.